Yes.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share with you my experience of working with mink in quite a few countries by now. It's a bit scary when you look back how long ago this started. Of course, currently I'm in northeast Scotland, quite far away from where we had planned to meet. And of course, we all wish we were able to meet together in Lapland. It would have been fantastic. But we are where we are. So what I will do today is take you on a grand tour of 5 different projects that have attempted with more or less success and different objectives to deal with the impact of American mink on native fauna. So we're going to spend some time in northern Spain, the Hebrides, coast of Scotland. We're going to spend some time in mainland Scotland, where I spend much of my time working with mink. And then we're going to change hemisphere and move to South America, to 2 fantastic projects with which I've been collaborating in recent years that are working in incredibly contrasting environments, both trying to deal with the impact of American mink, and they provide a really interesting perspective. And my work in that context is part of a large project that is trying to deal with those invasive species that will not be eradicated. They will be there for the long term, we know that. And there is so many of them in South America. So, of course, the work and the conference today is in the context of the consequence of mink farming. And of course, there has been an enormous amount of media coverage in the recent weeks and days in the context of COVID-19 and the discovery that mink are not only infected, but they are competent hosts able to amplify the virus and transmit it to humans. So this has put a spotlight on mink farming like never before. And quite recently, the link has been made between the risk in farms with the risk in the natural environment. And one of those Danish officials was quoted saying that it seems like no one really knows the consequence of this. Indeed, we don't. We do know, of course, that American mink has quite a strong impact on a range of ground nesting birds and mammals and frogs, has been stated earlier. So this is what we are trying to reduce. So it's useful to ask, what would success look like, successful mink control look like when reviewing different projects? Of course, you would like it to have clearly stated objectives, which is not always the case. And that would be something like, by how much should mink density be reduced for it to be successful? You would like a project to be fully spatially optimized. That is, that control should really consider our understanding of the biology of mink and the remarkable ability of mink to reinvade through dispersal. And this can be used by exploiting the sourcing dynamics that control can create. I will come back to that later. You want to use the best tools and best technology for removal, but also for monitoring the success and making sense of the data collected. Quite crucially, we want any mink control project to be sustainable and resilient. And that is resilient to the fact that most of the funding we deal with is short term. We don't have funding ad infinitum, yet we know that mink control will have to be done for the long term. But also we need to be able to cope with extreme events, extreme floods and stuff like the pandemic, which I'm sure has pushed back many projects. And we want to achieve shared learning, learn from each other, avoiding repeating past mistakes. So it's useful to ask, what does success look like? So of course, to the impact of mink. At very high density, we can have catastrophic impact where some entire bird colonies are being wiped out. At a lesser impact would be some individuals being killed of a native prey. the population potential of those native prey may be being reduced, but the population remaining viable. And of course, at very low density, things would be as normal or nearly. On the x-axis, of course, we are dealing with potentially very large mink densities initially. And we can deploy, when you try to move from the right to the left, we can deploy a range of tools and technologies that have been tried and tested. And every mink trapper is convinced that his method is the one and only best method, but we always benefit from learning from each other. And of course, we can try to reduce those mink densities. But as we reach very low densities, it becomes exceedingly expensive. We all know that eradication, removing the last few individuals, is super expensive. So let's move to Spain first. So you probably know that in northern Spain, a few remnant population of the European mink, a critically endangered species. And it has been a very long project that has been going for more than 20 years now, that has been aiming to remove the American mink in red to protect the European mink in yellow. So keep those color coding in your head because two mink is quite complicated. The one on the right is the European mink, and it has a little bit more white around the nose, which obviously makes it a much more desirable species than the American mink that only has white on the lower chin. That's no good. So if you look back at the projects that have been put together here and what were their statements of objectives, they use a bit loosely the term to eradicate the American mink from the region occupied by the European mink, that is to remove the last one. But there are mink farms in that area, so that was never achievable. The second goal was to control the spread of the American mink in the region because the situation is very dynamic. Both species are still spreading. And they obtain a range of live projects, quite a vast number of live projects, in fact. Quite a large amount of investment by the public purse has been put in trying to save this critically endangered species. So in the early days, things were not quite as good as they are now. So in those days, their funding was quite erratic, and they had no sampling design that we could discern. So they had an ad hoc trapping design over a vast area of some thousands of square kilometers. And they would trap some places where they would find signs of either European mink in yellow or American mink. And they would have campaigns in the spring and campaign in the autumn. All American mink coal would be killed and European mink would be marked with a transponder and released. But they had no funding to have any form of monitoring of the impact. So after some years, a master's student worked with me trying to analyze those data. And we tried to contrive those rather messy sampling design into an occupancy modeling framework, which is crucial for a species like mink because it allows for the fact that we don't always see mink when. So those methods allow for imperfect detectability. What did we find? We found that in the first 11 years of the project, it completely failed. Instead of pushing back the American mink, it spread. Instead of restoring the declining European mink, it declined further. Occupancy were rising and declining respectively. We found strong evidence of asymmetric competition. That is, the American mink would preferentially colonize the sites occupied by European mink and displace them. And we found no evidence of colonization by European mink of sites previously occupied by American mink. Completely asymmetrical. And this was fueled by immigration from outside. So that report, of course, was an important quantitative evaluation, but it was about a painful reality check for people who had done those projects, had run glowing European reports stating that they had fulfilled their objectives, because really the evidence was not there. But what is positive is that it led to a much improved projects in more recent years with a proper use of monitoring platforms and excellent sampling design and much more result to show for their effort. So in this project, the problem really was that culled mink rise back from the death, as we are seeing currently in Denmark with mink popping out of the soil. But in this case, it was not gas from decomposition, but it was the dispersal process that was fueling recolonization. And this theme will come back again and again in this talk. Let's move to Scotland now, northwest Scotland. There the goal was very specific: remove every single mink from the Hebridean Islands, Lewis, Harris and Uist, to the northwest of the map here. This is an area that had no ground predators before, no mammalian predators, and thriving population of ground nesting birds, terns, plovers, lapwings, and so on. It was a well-funded project with a team of very competent and experienced trappers with equipment, boat, rigs, the whole thing. But they were tackling a very difficult terrain, 2,500 kilometers of bog bodies, a lot of water bodies, as you can see on this slide. The approach was to bury 7,500 traps and bait them with mink lure and trap them twice per year for a week. The traps were left in place and they were checked twice per year. And you can see here one of the sites where the traps were deployed. They deployed traps every 350 meters along rivers, lochs, and seashore. But if you zoom out on this loch and Drunga in Gaelic, you can see still the same loch in the center and all those red dots showing traps. And zoom out and still further traps. And zoom out and still further traps. Those reds are not lines, they are dots of a huge number of traps. Enormous effort, exceptional data. And again, at the end of the project, we were contracted by Scottish Natural Heritage, the government body in Scotland, to evaluate the evidence and provide some advice on the prospect of achieving success. And that was done with my collaborators, Thomas Connollier and Matt Oliver. What did we find? We found the population was well on its way down by 2011, that the number of mink that were remaining were quite likely to go extinct by 2007, 80%, or later. That is, if they were able to sustain the enormously intensive trapping regime they were implementing. So we were able to offer a distribution of likely extinction dates. And maybe we should have known that governments don't like probabilities. They want a set date. They want to know when they can stop funding this project. Unfortunately, the political environment and the security of funding were lacking. So they basically failed to complete the eradication. Today, there still are mink on Lewis and Harris. They catch about 10 to 30 per year. It has proved impossible to remove the last few individuals, and that's a common pattern. Of course, our modeling was providing probabilities, not certainties of removal, and they were contingent on sustaining the same trapping regime. And the funding environment was such that they could not. Instead of keeping the 7,500 traps that were mostly empty, they changed design and moved to an untested, responsive, targeted kill trapping. And this is, in our mind, the reason for the decline or the failure to eradicate. But of course, it's not a complete failure. The Arctic tern in Lewis and Harris has recovered spectacularly. There are terns everywhere now, new colonies where they used to be. And that, paradoxically, is reducing the political incentive to finish the jobs. Politicians feel that the problem has gone away. Yet, the terns will tell you, and all of us will tell you, that zombie mink will come back. Mink always telling. That is the real challenge. So let's now move to 3 other projects briefly that are not attempting eradication, but are aiming for the ongoing mink control short of eradication. In Scotland, in the dry side of the Andes in Argentina, in the super wet part of the Andes in Chile, in Patagonia. So in mainland Scotland, we started many, many years ago in 1996 with a tiny project, a trivially, pathetically small project where that little orange circle is moving. Then we moved to the Cairngorm National Park, a much larger area, quite marginal place for mink, but where some of the species we were trying to protect were still surviving. That was still much too small because mink from the lowland near the orange blob were moving into the area outlined in blue. Then the project expanded and expanded to cover 1/3 of Scotland, 29,000 square kilometers, bounded by seas and mountains. And that is crucial because it made our life much, much easier. And the project has been going ever since and is now funded for another 3 years. What defined that project is that it was a volunteer-based project. We created a grand coalition of everybody who does not like mink. So from conservationists to retired people, to hunters, to fishermen, everybody was agreeing on that idea of removing mink. We use extensively those mink monitoring graphs that I'm sure you're familiar with, so I will not go over that in any detail, but are fantastic ways to involve people who can check in their own neighborhood if a mink is present or help remove it, and if a zombie mink has come back to replace the mink that is now in the freezer. We deployed thousands of those rafts all over northeast Scotland and the west, and we achieve a very comprehensive coverage with approximately a raft every 2 or 3 kilometers. We're fortunate to have good research funding, so we could do a proper adaptive management approach and formally analyze the data at all stages of the project and to optimize all aspects of the project. The focus, of course, was density dependence. When you move mink from right to the left on this x-axis, you create some excellent conditions for the surviving mink living at low density and having a jolly good time. You also, by culling mink, reduce the mean age of mink. And mink are quite remarkable. A mink is old at 3 years old. So when you control mink, you don't have many old senescent mink. You only have prime age females who breed maximum intensity and at maximum rate. So there was a strong impact of compensation through increased reproduction at low density from age and territory quality. The most important finding for our work is our work on dispersal. We were able to use DNA forensic to formulate pedigrees, parentage analysis of mink, and reconstruct the pattern of dispersal. So when the mother of a mink and its offspring are in 2 different places, one of them has dispersed. When 2 siblings are in different places, one of them has dispersed. When half siblings are in different places, we can put some probability that they have dispersed, because the father could have dispersed as well. What we find is very strong compensation through dispersal. Mink are stupendous dispersers. That is why they are such successful invaders. 90%, on this graph you see the age of mink in months, and on the y-axis the probability that they have left the maternal home range, first 10 kilometers. And you see that by a few months old, nearly all mink have left the natal area, irrespective of the density condition. If you want to catch them close to where they are born, you need to catch them very young. After that, they spread through the landscape. On this map, you can see in orange the location of the birth of the litters, and in blue where they have been caught. And you see all those green lines denoting dispersal movement. And they basically crisscross our whole study area. You see in the bottom of this graph here showing the median dispersal distance of 20 kilometers. You can see that a quarter or so of mink move 80 kilometers or more, and some up to 150 kilometers. That is terrifying, because if you look at all of the 3 systems I've shown you so far, and if you were to draw a circle of 100-kilometer radius, you will see that all our control area are quite small in the context of 100 kilometers or more mink dispersal. All of those areas are highly susceptible to recolonization. And for those of you who do field work will know that trapping such large area is a tremendous amount of effort. So saying do more is not just feasible. The good news is that given the level of coverage we had achieved, a trap every 1 or 2 kilometers, we managed to reduce mink densities to very low densities over 3 years of control in each catchment. Each line here is a river catchment. The black one is the region-wide effect, and you can see that, in effect, it succeeded. However, our project, like all other projects, was subject to the funding roller coasters. Some years of plenty, like you're experiencing now with the Interreg, and then a cliff edge where your funding vanishes, you apply for more funding and it comes back. And in fact, we had here a range of different project phases, highs and lows of funding, a big gap of 2 years of no funding in 16-17, and currently we have much resource, but that will last only as long as it lasts. And of course, this is terribly inefficient as far as mink are concerned. Whenever we have a dip in funding, as you can see here, the mink population comes back through recolonization from beyond the project area. And then the good news is that we're able to reinstate all our network of rafter volunteers, and we're able to again achieve control. But this is terribly inefficient. It's a waste of resource. What we have learned, though, is to get much better at controlling mink. We were able to characterize the landscape from mink captures and find that some parts of the landscape were very attractive to mink. Some river sections are consistently attractive and recolonized by reinvading mink coming from the south of the study area, 100 kilometers or plus away. We know where those places are now, and we focus those areas very intensively for control. So what we have learned in that Scottish project is that yes, it is possible to control mink, especially if you understand well its biology and where density dependence comes from and how you can use that. For sure, the high dispersal that characterizes mink makes large-scale control essential. If you cannot do it big, don't do it. But some other areas are very attractive to reinvading mink, and we can focus your conservation effort to those places, and it makes it possible to be much more cost-effective. All of us know that most traps catch nothing, and a few spots catch most of the plays. When you know that, you become much more efficient. Of course, short-term funding is a major obstacle and increase the long-term cost of invasive control. And I wish governors would understand that at some stage. I don't have time to talk much about that now, but I would welcome some questions later on. But working with volunteers is a whole research topic on its own. Volunteers are not just cheap labor, but they must be fully part of the project, enthused, replenished, and re-recruited. But that would be a whole different talk. Moving on a grand tour of the world, we move to South America. First to the Santa Cruz province on the east of the Andes, then to finish in the Los Rios region into the west of the Andes. So that place will challenge all your understanding of mink biology. We are basically dealing with mink on the moon. Mink where there should be no mink, where I would never have imagined from all my experience in Europe that mink would ever want to be. It basically looks like this. This is not a habitat for riparian species. Yet they are there. There are escarpments and big plateau, mesetas, surrounding those big steppes, and there are crater lakes. You see those little black dots on the map. And those crater lakes are occupied by a range of critically endangered species, including the Patagonia grebe, or the Macatobiano, as it's called locally. That's what it looks like. This is not the moon, this is Patagonian grebe habitat and mink habitat. And those places are invaded in late summer by dispersing mink. That creates the worst case scenario. Those grebes have very long lived, have no anti-predator defense, and breed occasionally when the conditions are right. Mink are dispersing from the surrounding canyons, including the one surrounding yellow here, and are spreading up to that plateau where they have no business being. They cannot survive there in the winter. And you can see in yellow those canyons that look marginally greener and better than the moon itself. But it's still very, very marginal habitat. I would not dream to set a trap here if I was to see this in Scotland. When mink move up there, they cause mass mortality of those critically endangered species. In fact, a single grebe, a mink, is known to have killed 33 nesting adults in one single invasion event. And that is catastrophic for this species. So when you think of this impact-density relationship, the grebe is on the far left. Even a tiny amount of mink is too many mink. So there is a fantastic high investment conservation project that is underway there, where they expand huge amount of effort to prevent mink from causing the extinction of this endangered species. Lali Fasola and Kenny Rusler have an enormous commitment to this project, and they are successful in removing a small number of very important mink that are born in the lowland and are spreading to the plateau. But again, mink are coming back every year because there is a vast area lower down that is more productive that is sending juvenile mink. So here you have a vulnerable native endemic species that has no refuge for mink, even in the lowest productivity habitat that is a sink for mink, but they are able to get there. The conservation effort is successful, but very expensive because access there is enormously difficult. There are very few people to enlist to help, and grebe only reproduce every once in a while when the conditions are right. So it works, but of course one worries, how long can this last for? The current understanding is that the impact of mink come from those canyons around the area. But if you apply on this map that 100-kilometer radius motivated by our work in Scotland, you can see that it's quite possible, in fact, that they come from even further away in more greener habitat in the foothill of the Andes. And that is, of course, the important question. Where are the sources where those mink come from? If you detect those sources, you should be able to solve the problem. Let's cross the Andes ourselves now and move to the western side of the Andes, the Los Rios region. It is a world apart. It could not be more different. Volcanoes and water, a lot of water, a lot of rivers, hence the name of the place. It is being described as a 5-star hotel for mink. And indeed, all those wetland habitats are ideally suitable for American mink. What are they doing in that area? Well, the problem with mink there, or one of the problems, is that they are at such high density that they have a high impact on the local smallholding farmers and their chickens. They are losing poultry. And a project called Control Comunitario del Vison has been initiated by the Ministry of Agriculture and has been distributing for the last 5 years live cage traps to those farmers who are working to protect their own resources. This has made it possible to achieve a very large-scale level of coverage. Each of those dots here are traps that have been deployed, and each of the red circles are mink that have been caught. Over 11,000 kilometers, and since September 15, they have removed a staggering 5,375 mink from this rather small area. This is as many mink as all the projects in Europe I've mentioned to you. So what have been the lessons that have been learned from this project? Well, despite all that trapping effort, it's very uncertain that they have had much an impact, or if any impact at all, on the mink population size. If they've reduced it, it's by a small amount. You can see the number of capture, which is kind of a raw measure of the trapping, the success per trap effort, because trap effort has been varying, but there is very little hint of any decline there. What has happened though, is that having removed 5,500 mink has led to a very clear reduction of the impact of mink on farmers' livelihoods. Farmers are no longer losing their chickens and their poultry. At some level, the problem has been solved by Eduardo Raffo and his team of mink control heroes. Those mink farmers, those volunteers, have contributed to solving their own problem with support. So if you look back at that density impact relationship, it looks like for chickens, it doesn't take to remove mink by a very vast amount to reduce the impact of mink by a very large amount. And that is most likely, again, to do with the dispersal behavior of mink. Only when the wetlands are full do mink move into the farmlands. So it's about movement, dispersal, and habitat selection. So here, as in Scotland, the very wide citizen participation by farmers, but all the other professionals, has contributed to targeting the effort in high impact area, contributes to the sustainability of the project. It is also completely new for Southern South America to have volunteer-based project. It is a revolution. The project, of course, and its success is attracting a lot of publicity and has recently attracted more funding to expand this successful recipe to the adjacent regions. And this might hopefully to deal with the source of mink that are reinvading that area. Because again, 100-kilometer radius encompass areas where there currently is no mink control. Saving the chickens is nice and good, but there is a lot of native species that are also severely impacted by American mink. And the question that we are working on is what additional effort is required to not only save the chickens, but also save the native birds and native biodiversity. So let's look back at what we've learned from those different case studies. I ask you, what would the success look like and what would be the stated objective? Well, the answer is clear that the objective will depend on the species that is concerned, and the amount of mink reduction that you must achieve depends on the species that you're focusing on. For some species like the Patagonian, you must remove mink from some area, which is super challenging. Terns seem to recover quite early when mink are reduced but not eliminated. So are water voles, who can cope with a degree of extinction recolonization, and some species like chickens seem quite easy to save. I told you we should also worry about spatially optimizing mink control. And in fact, that involves understanding where mink are reproducing, where in the landscape are those hotspots that are spreading over the whole landscape and causing such a widespread impact. In fact, I have lied to you, there are no zombie mink, we all know that. What there is, which is important, is highly consistent habitat selection that leads to repeated recolonization of the best female mink habitat made vacant by controls. So mink come back, the descendant of the mink that are in our freezers come back in the same place and recolonize the same areas. Peter asked me yesterday what was the surprise that I had about the project. And I think the scale of dispersal is what surprised all of us. So you again see a radius of 100 kilometers around all the study areas. And they're all small. Even in Patagonia, where distances are enormous, we are still working at relatively small scale in relation to mink potential. So go supersize or don't bother when mink control is concerned. Next, dealing with resilience of was terribly challenging. We are all dealing with short-term, fixed-term funding. You're coming at the end of your 3 years of funding now, and we know that whenever we stop or put our attention elsewhere, reinvasion will reoccur. What does help tremendously for achieving sustainability is working with people. Working with citizen scientists, citizen conservationists contributes to resilience. It does amazing things for sustainability, and it does things that professionals cannot deliver. Professionals will work as long as they're salaried. If you're able to empower your local communities, your hunters, your fishermen, your retired people who want to do something, you will achieve. Of course, you also have to plan for resilience to extreme events. We've had twice in the last 10 years, a 1 in 200-year flood in Scotland that has had a massive impact on all the river ecosystem. We had COVID, and of course, nobody could plan for that. And that remains a tremendous challenge to have the resilience so our best effort with the best technique and spatial optimization are not ruined by real challenges. Final point about my wish list of successful projects is utilizing the best tools and the best technology. And this is what you have been focusing on, and that's really quite important result. Likewise, achieving shared learning And learning from each other's mistakes and so on is exactly what this conference is all about. And I'm looking forward to hearing about your work over the next 2 days. So that's me. I would like to thank the huge number of people that have contributed to this project. It's been really a team effort over many, many years, multiple disciplines, and the work is still going. Now it's really a conservation delivery project, but there is so many things that can be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xavier. Really interesting. I do have a first question from the audience, and that is, when you talk about hotspots for trapping, what spatial extent does this imply? Really spots or rather areas, regions?
More territories. So in the range of kilometers, or it really depends on your landscape. It depends on the gradients in your landscape. In Patagonia, in Argentine Patagonia, it is maybe the canyons, and within the canyons, the best part of the canyons. In Scotland, it is to some extent the lowland coastal plain, but also the bird cliffs. So what works the best for us is where we have caught a female before, but that has dispersed, that has selected that area for establishment. We know we're going to catch more females in the same territory. It's a bit like golden eagle territories or fox dens. What was a good territory in 1 year will remain a good territory in the future.
So the first thing is to identify the good territories, the good mink territories.
That's the biggest challenge. We find them empirically, having done the comprehensive deployment, and then we can shrink it after. But of course, that's a bit suboptimal. In an ideal world, we'd be able to predict ahead of time and arrive in a new place and be able to say there will be a territory here and there. Is not so easy as that. So it's a start, but it's not perfect.
Okay. Yesterday, when you and me talked, you told me, do everything you can to keep the enthusiasts. You can't afford losing them. What do you mean by that, and what can we do to keep local mink control heroes committed to mink management programs?
Okay, good. That's a very important point. So we have a very small number of staff who are supporting people, meeting them when they're collecting mink from them and so on. But it takes 7 hours, even in Scotland, to drive from one part of the area to the other one. And we never had more than 3 staff, and we had 800 volunteers. So human contact, if you can, is very important. People love hearing about a success. People want to be part of a success. I think that's the main point, really. And so if you are taking on a feasible project and they see that they have contributed to a success of that feasible project, you have a good start. But then people, of course, the problem is that when you are successful, you have no more mink, or very few mink, or 1 mink every 2 years. And you really have to work very hard to convince people that despite them not having seen footprints of mink on their raft for a long time, you still need them to check that no re-invasion has taken place. Because if you overlook that, you might have local reproduction and again, mink spreading everywhere. So we always reinforce that message of no mink is good news. Is the password of a website. If you want to lock and hack on the data, no mink, good news. That's the password. We spend a lot of time providing them with the result of our projects, of our student projects, of the recoveries of native faunas. We basically invest in them. We view them as full part of the team. Anybody else know about what works well, what doesn't go well, and so on. But it takes work because people walk away, people break their legs, people change their jobs. So you always need to recruit volunteers. We have a different demographic project, 1 mink demography and 1 volunteer demography. You need recruitment, you need new people because you will lose some volunteers for all sorts of reasons. So give it enough time and resource. Don't assume that starting with a bunch of keen hunters will give you forever a workforce of hunters that will continue. They will continue for some time, but not forever.
Thank you. And the audience, the participants, please put your questions in the chat forum if you have some questions.
Per Arna has a question, I think, no?
Yeah, okay. Per, go ahead.
I have a question. Great talk, Xavier. Always interesting to hear you. I have a technical question, and we have tried the mink raft in Sweden and also in Finland, but in Sweden we have done like 100 and it didn't work, and we took Jonathan Reynolds up visiting the project, looking at our mink rafts, and he can't really understand why the minks in Sweden and Finland don't visit the rafts, and you use the mink rafts
Everywhere.
very much, but I'm wondering, I mean, in Scotland I know, and in Spain I know, but South America, do they also in Patagonia, do they visit the raft?
Yes. Yeah, something wrong with your mink there. But in Eastern Patagonia, they have conibear traps onto the raft because access is so challenging.
Yeah.
I mean, rafts are not perfect, of course. No, we have some mink raft that go on, or mink that go on a raft once per month, and then dance around it on the other days. And also, of course, like all trappers, sometimes it's very frustrating and difficult to get a mink to go back on the raft. But you keep trying until it makes mistakes, and you get it. We work in place with crazy rainfall. No, I mean, West Scotland is 2-meter rainfall, and in Chile it's also enormous rainfall. They are only starting to use the raft there, but it's always about a microsite placement. Those places where the raft will withstand the floods, and then you try every trick, But I mean, you guys are as good or better trappers than any of us, so I will not give you lessons as to how to trap mink. So.
No, but it's just interesting, the behavior of the mink. I mean, we really put the rafts in as instructed by Jonathan Reynolds. I mean, he has the black belt in mink rafts, and he's here, and he can't understand why they don't use the raft. So it's a behavioral difference in minks in Sweden and Finland, because I mean, you see now in the chat that in Norway the mink goes up on a raft. It's strange.
Maybe you need to change aftershave.
Yeah. Thank you.
Or learn the mink to visit the mink rafts, or teach him. There's another question from a participant, and that is, I've heard that poison is used in New Zealand against possums. Has this been tried on mink, and what are the pros and cons? Perhaps native species and environmental issues.
Totally, it's strictly banned legally in the UK. We have wherever you have native species, that are potentially susceptible, or even through secondary poisoning. Poisoning is completely out of question. It's crucial, totally crucial, to have public support, and you have to do everything to keep public support. We are all under scrutiny by animal rights people. And so far, we actually have quite a good relationship with them. They say, we don't like killing things, but if you're going to kill them, do it like you do, and do it for a reason, and do it well, and so on. Using poison would be a very, very ill advice. I would say it would cause a tremendous problem of not only suffering, but contamination of the environment and non-target species. So in no countries where we work is it allowed. And even if it was, I think it would be a bad idea to use that. Now, the situation in New Zealand is different, where there was no native placental mammals, and they have a very different attitude to animal welfare. I guess irrespective of your personal opinion, you can only do what you do if you have the support of the public. So I would not go there.
All right, next question. Have you tried to use dogs to hunt mink to get the hard ones that do not go into trap?
Yes. To some extent, it does. Again, in Scotland, at least, you cannot hunt with mink. You cannot have the mink catch the prey, fox, deer, or mink. But you can use mink for detecting for finding the dens, for finding those difficult to get mink. And then they can either be shot or they can be trapped. We don't quite use the leaf blowers that you guys use in the all archipelago in Finland. But I mean, mink dogs are super valuable, but very hard to get. There's a lot of effort to train them. So the people in Patagonia are now training several dogs, and it makes a big difference, especially when they are at very, very low density. But we all know it's a hunting dog is a long-term commitment. They're worth a lot of money. So we have as many as we can get, but it's hard work. But they're great. They're fantastic tools. They are part of the toolbox.
All right. Another question from the participant. Have you had otters getting trapped during your project?
We had one otter in 15 years. Then he was a juvenile in December. But we basically don't get otters. We put a separator in the middle of the trap to make it very hard for. It's only quite small traps. We either put a board with a small hole, or we put a separator in the trap so we don't get otters. We get pine martens. We get cats. No, they are live traps, so they are released unharmed. They may not be very happy, but they are not harmed. But we've tried very hard not to get otters despite trapping underwater, and it has been successful, except for that one incident. In fact, before the conservation project was done, when you were doing some preliminary work, and never since. And I'm hoping it's going to stay that way.
All right. I'd like to go back to the local mink control heroes and the communication bit of your projects. I mean, communication is quite hard, and I suppose it has to be quite extensive in the projects you've been a part of. What have you done? Is it websites, or have you worked with media or personal contacts, or how do you work?
We've tried all of them. So initially it was meeting people when we had a small project. We of course had the regular newsletter, both in letters, both in print and by email. And then we invest in a website, of course, like everybody else. We also invest in a mink app, and we did some formal randomized experiment to see how much of a difference our lovely website and mink app would make to people. Because everyone falls in love with the website, but few of us have data as to how effective they are. And like in all volunteer projects, we have many white men of a certain age who are volunteers, many in the 50s, 60s, many gamekeepers, and they're not necessarily fan of using fancy phones and high bandwidth apps. So we did a randomized experiment where some volunteers were receiving the app, some were just receiving the simple website. And what we were trying to see is if you could have reduce the time delay between people recording mink signs and sending us the data. And could we convince them of giving us more evidence that there is no mink? Because we need to know that there is no mink. And people are very reluctant to tell you that there is nothing on my raft. The truth is that it did not make a big impact. It made some impact, but it was not a very large impact. There is a classical case of selective participation. Some people enlist and others don't. So you already have two types, the more technologically savvy ones that are part and others are not. So that was a bit underwhelming. But I know we have an enormous public engagement project from the schools. The schools are the most successful. When the kids come back from the school and tell their parents about the project and invasive species issues and the achievements, that works really very well. So we do plenty of that. We do tons of media. In the current project, we have one full-time media officer who spends all her time doing that. But that's because we are very well resourced at the moment. So we try everything. In Chile, I think they're having the project officers meeting people, meeting farmers is very important. I think when you can, human contact is best, but when you have huge scale project, is very difficult.
I suppose. I reckon that managing animals is quite easy compared to managing people. you had any problems with conflicts around what you're doing, or getting people to understand what you're doing and the good parts of it?
So we had some. So we start as a university project, and then with the national park, and then we enlarge, working with all the fishing organization, the Salmon Fishing Trust, because they have spent a lot of time on the river, and they were very good people to work with us. But we found that some of those trusts, fisheries trusts as we call them, are very strong organization with good organizational structure, and some are very small, ancient style dinosaur organization who want to do fish hatcheries and nothing else. And no, we completely committed ourselves to work with those people, 14 of those different trusts. And we found a real difference in the strength of the organizational strength and the management strength of those organizations. And that was a really delayed us by 3-4 years. If you have one good organization and then in the middle one very weak one, because the mink don't care who is managing the rivers and they move between catchments, having one weak group can be very damaging. But yet if you commit to work with people, you cannot just suddenly, we will take over and we will do it for you. So that has been the biggest challenge. It delayed us by quite a lot of years. One trust was one man and his dog, and he was from the previous century, and then he wanted to do stuff in a way it would not embrace change. And we had to wait for him to retire before we could fill the gap. And our mink were just coming out of that river like crazy, because 100 female mink in that catchment, that's 500 young per year produced in that one river, and kept reinvading. So that was a real challenge. That's not really a conflict, is that people are slow in changing, and you have to work very hard in convincing them that it's useful to do something a bit differently.
So in projects you've been engaged in, it's really important to localize the hotspots for the mink, and also target the target groups to get a good understanding of the target groups. So you have two sides of it here. It's kind of a human dimensions dilemma or work, I suppose.
And totally, and both are a bit trial and error. Now, initially we worked with gamekeepers. Now, we thought they would be the best asset for controlling mink, and in fact they were not very good at all, because they only care about their local patch. So we tried with them and we changed group. So we found out a different optimal group, the fishing organization, and the same for the locations. Some places are obvious hotspots. Many nature reserves, in fact, were full of mink in those days, no longer. And some places are more subtle. Some places we're still having surprise. We took a long time to really focus on the bird colonies. We have lots of low cliffs with kittiwakes and shags and so on in Scotland. And for a long time, we thought it was too stormy and too exposed areas. And so you keep learning. For nearly 10 years, we were not systematically covering the cliffs. Now and they were the source of recolonization. So you keep an open mind, be modest that we only know a little bit, and there will always some new stuff to learn, because this is expensive business. Now we can only get money more if you can say we will do it better, faster, cheaper next year. So we always need to find a new way of doing it better. So yeah, we keep trying.
Good. Thank you very, very much, Xavier. Very interesting. Thanks a lot. I wish I could give you an applause, but maybe we can find some applause in the teams. But thank you very much. Now we have a coffee break for 50 minutes. So we'll start the program again at 10:15. And thanks for now. Grab a cup of coffee and see you again. Bye-bye.